Couple things first. So welcome everybody. Happy New Year. It has been a year since we last saw each other on Zoom. Yesterday, we did have an opportunity for an in-person meeting if people felt comfortable doing that. We did require masks and everybody that attended did comply with that. We had about 70 attendees come in person, and we have over 200 people on today's presentation, which is one of the reasons we're controlling when people speak, just to kind of keep things moving along and be more efficient. In the chat, several people were kind of putting in their name and all. Just want to let everybody know you do not need to log in or raise your hand or let us know you're here. Your registration, let us know that you were registered, and this program actually keeps track of who is in attendance. So we will know if registered folks did not attend. All that's being handled for you. So you can just sit back and enjoy the presentation. Feel free to ask questions as needed. Want to make sure you're in the right place. This is the Kern Irrigated Lands Coalition's annual grower meeting. We have Buena Vista on the line. I want to make sure you can see Tim. I can't see everybody. So Tim, give a shout out. There's Tim. Great. Coelho Water District Coalition. David Halapoff is the new manager of the coalition. So David, if you can make sure that you say your hellos. David Halapoff is the new manager of the Coelho Water District Coalition.
Hi.
I am Nicole Bell. I am the manager of the Kern River Watershed Coalition Authority. And for the West Side Water Quality Coalition, we have Morgan Mitchell. And Morgan is the new manager there, who has recently replaced Chris Lawrence. So you will be working with Morgan Mitchell. So the four of us and our teams are available to assist you with maneuvering the Irrigated Lands program. So the next slides, again, this is just so that you have the information if you don't know how to reach us already. As a reminder, this presentation is being recorded. It will be posted to our website in the very near future. So if you know anyone that, or if you have perhaps staff members that you want to have participate or watch the video, we will do what we did last year. We will post it to our website. It'll be a YouTube link so you can watch the recorded video. And then the second step, in order to get your annual meeting certification to get credit for participating, you do need to go back. So follow the directions, go back and complete that grower survey. Last year, we did have folks that watched the video and did not do the survey, and we have no way of connecting the two to know who that was. So just want to make sure that that is happening. Want to make sure that you did register for all of your memberships. I already know some of you did not because the emails are starting to come in. So please, if you forgot to register for all of your memberships, send Trilby an email at tbarton@ppeng, that's the Provost and Pritchard email address.com, or you can email to me and I will make sure it gets to Trilby. And that is admin@KRWCA.org, so that we can make sure we get credit for your attendance and that you get credit as well. And then just a reminder that you are required to attend at least one meeting a year for each of your coalitions and for each of your memberships. So it's critical that when you certify meeting attendance, that you always register for all of your memberships for each of the current coalitions, and that when you are completing your annual meeting certification, you have two ways to do that, either through the invoice process, or most folks are doing it when they file their reports by the March 1 deadline. But what we're seeing is some of you are doing your annual certification to show that you're in compliance for one of your memberships and not the other memberships. So we just want to make sure you know that the certification does not cross memberships. You need to physically do that for each of the members when you're signing and submitting that paperwork. So just a reminder there, because we want everybody that takes the time to participate, we want to make sure that you are in compliance. Yeah, so this is what I kind of already covered. Just gives you information so that you know, if you know anybody that's not in attendance today and needs to be, these are the steps that you would need to take. This will be posted on our website, so folks will need have the opportunity to see this as well. Next slide. Good news, this year reporting is streamlined. It's the irrigation and nitrogen management plans and worksheets only that are due this year. So there will be no farm evaluation and no management practices implementation reports. You did those last year. This year, it's just the irrigation and nitrogen management reports that are due. So your reporting will be a lot more streamlined. One of the reminders is that everybody, doesn't matter with the new irrigated lands program updates, everybody starting last year is required to submit all reports. So just a reminder, if you didn't have to file them in the beginning of the program, everybody is required to file them now. And March 1st of each year is the deadline. A reminder of all of the due dates that you have a quick reference at your hands if you need it. And then again, we say this every year, but the regulatory date is March 1st. That is not a date that the coalitions picked. So we have no authority to extend that deadline. So that is a regulatory deadline that will not be extended. So just a reminder of that. It's important to file those reports on time. And as you're probably well aware, I send multiple email blasts out each year, reminding folks of the upcoming deadlines. And please do not ignore those emails. We are improving our efficiencies. It used to be, I sent those emails to everybody, just kind of in a blast. Now, the first ones, before we really get into things, might be a, hey, everybody, reminder to everybody. But then I will be pulling lists of only people who haven't filed the report. So if you are getting those email reminders, it does mean that your report is not completed. We do have different tools that allow us to know if you started a report or maybe completed a report and then didn't submit it. The critical step is submitting the reports by the March 1 deadline. So I have the tools and the other managers have the tools to reach out to you and remind you, you need to log into your account and complete the process. So again, just don't ignore the emails if they come in. They're not blast emails to everybody. They're specifically coming to you to tell you that you haven't completed something. It's just the quickest, most efficient way we can reach out to over 800 members all at the same time. So just want to make sure everybody knows that. Oh, and then just a reminder to kind of get in the habit of all land that you're farming has to be enrolled. So if anytime throughout the year you start to irrigate land that hadn't previously been enrolled, you pick up a new lease or you purchase land, you do want to make sure that you contact the coalition right away to get the appropriate paperwork to be able to enroll those parcels. Here at the Kern River Watershed Coalition, I don't believe the other coalitions in Kern do this, but we do have to charge a late fee for growers who enroll acreage late. And that late fee, as you know, has been $10.50 per acre since the beginning of the program. So it is pretty steep. One of the reasons for that is to kind of, the board thinks it's helpful to keep people to pay timely so that we're not having to spend a lot of time with collections. But we do want to avoid people having to pay those late fees. So it's important to enroll timely. We do find this time of year when people go in to start doing their reporting that many times they've realized that they've picked up land that they forgot to tell us about. So just want to kind of keep doing these annual reminders so that it kind of becomes more second nature to think when you pick up more ground or plant ground to always contact the coalition to make sure everything's enrolled properly. Online payment process. We started the online payment process last year. That went very well. Again, this year, we are requiring the online payment process. Some of you have still sent in checks. Of course, we will accept a check, but the preferred payment method, because for ease and efficiencies, is to use our online payment process. That payment process is very quick, probably takes less than 60 seconds to log into your account. Basically, you type in your bank account number, your routing number. The system itself already shows the amount of money that is owed. You hit your button, you print a receipt. Everything is real time, so your balance due changes to 0 right then and there, and nobody has to touch it again. It's all tied into all of our accounting paperwork, and everything's done. I do get a notification when you have paid online within moments of your making those payments, so I am notified of that. And then of course we have all of our accounting records too. So it's been a pretty slick program. Really appreciate folks cooperating and using that program. A future enhancement that I am working on is to actually add kind of the historic payment information to the program so that you can have access to it. I, of course, have access to all the historic records, but we haven't made those available to growers yet. So we are working on that as a future enhancement so that you can log into your account and see a full payment history of acres enrolled and all of that. So hopefully over the next several months, that will be a new enhancement that you will have available to you. And if you have other suggestions for something you'd like to see within our program, please do send me a quick email, because we are always looking to improve our efficiencies and the process. We do get a lot of really good feedback on our program, so we are proud of what we've created for our members to use. And we appreciate input so that we can improve the process and make things easier for you as well. CV salts, the Central Valley Salinity Alternatives for Long-Term Sustainability. We have had CV salts meetings over the last couple of years. We've had a couple. We will, over the next year or two, have more CV salts meetings so that we can bring you up to speed and update you on the CV salts requirements and how they're being met. Today's presentation is really just to make sure our growers know that CV salts is part of the irrigated lands general orders, and there is a requirement that the irrigated lands enrolled acreage meets salt compliance and nitrate compliance. Actually, all permitted dischargers have to meet this, salt compliance and nitrate compliance. The salt compliance avenue for compliance is the salt control program, and it's the P&O study, which is the prioritization and optimization study of how to deal with salts. And that is a long-term program. The studies are 10 to 15 years. The key here is that the irrigated lands coalitions are responsible through the general order requirements to handle the salt control program and the nitrate control program. So compliance on your behalf for both of these programs for all of your enrolled acreage. The P&O study we have been collecting funds for 2 years now and paying for those on your behalf. For lands that were not or are not enrolled in the program that are under another WDR, commonly referred to as a permit, if you received this time last year a notice to comply from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, you had 6 months. You had until July 15th for those permits that you're responsible for to choose if you were going to try to go it on your own or participate in the joint cooperative program, which is the P&O study. And quite frankly, ag is going to need to do the P&O study in order to qualify. But you would have had to select that specifically to the regional board. Same goes with the nitrate compliance, the nitrate control program, the state has been, or the Central Valley has been broken up into priority areas. So the nitrate control program, we in Kern County are considered priority 2 areas. So at some point this year, we will receive notices to comply for the nitrate control program from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. The program has been going on up north for the last 2 years in priority 1 areas. In order for ag to comply with the nitrate control program, they will have to participate in management zones. And the management zone participation is through your irrigated lands coalitions. So again, for any acreage enrolled, we are handling the salt compliance and nitrate compliance. If you have other permits, you are going to be responsible when you receive that notice to comply to respond, follow the instructions in the notice and respond to the Regional Water Quality Control Board for any WDRs related to your operation that are not enrolled with our coalitions. Any questions on that? I know that's new, it's becoming reality. We've talked about it a bit. Our website, KRWCA.org, under the advocacy tab, has meeting information for all the executive committee meetings that I've been going to for many years now. So there's a lot of information there, but the cvsalts.info page is a great way to learn about CV salts, the nitrate control program, and the salt program if you're interested in that. And that cvsalts.info was created by the Public Education and Outreach Committee, which I am the chairman for the Central Valley. A lot of really good information there, and we do keep it up to date. So there's a lot of information there from the priority 1 management zones. And although we have not received our notice to comply yet for the nitrate control program, the Kern coalition leads, as well as other permitted dischargers, industry representatives have been meeting for several months now to form the necessary organization to develop our Kern management zones. So we are moving forward with that. And over the next few months, we should probably have more information that we're able to provide at that time. But we are taking the lead to move this process forward because our growers, to meet the general order regulatory compliance, will need their acreage to participate in a management zone. So we are moving forward with that. I did mention that in the cover letters for your invoices this year so that you would know why we had the $1 per acre increase, some of the new costs that are coming up that we're having to fund, and this work for CV salts is part of that. So we will keep you posted as that moves forward. All right, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Morgan Campbell to go over the farm builder and your regulatory compliance forms. So Morgan?
Great.
Actually, Morgan, hold on one sec. Sorry, I see a Q&A. There's a question. What is the date for being late for 2022 plantings? March 1 is the deadline for last year's crops. So keep in mind that the reports you're filing by March 1 of 2022 are for your 2021 crops. So March 1 is the deadline to file your reports.
Great.
Morgan, sorry about that. Go ahead.
No problem. I'm assuming my PowerPoint is up for everyone to see.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Campbell. I'm an environmental scientist. I assist all of the Kern coalitions with their irrigated lands regulatory program compliance. I'm going to cover 2 items today. The first is just a refresher on priority practices on farm. And then the second is how to get started with the online regulatory form submission process using ILRP Farm and specifically a program called Farm Builder. So our priority practices refresher, what are priority practices? These are on-farm practices that the regional board has deemed to be incredibly important to the protection of groundwater quality. And so those three practices are well destruction and proper abandonment, wellhead protection practices for active and inactive wells, and then accounting for nitrogen in your irrigation water. So first up, we have proper well abandonment. The reason why this is important is that wells are a direct path to groundwater. So any chemical or surface water contaminant that might occur at the top of the wellhead, if the well is improperly abandoned, it can make its way down the well casing directly into the aquifer. So the general order does require that members ensure that all abandoned wells on their property are properly destroyed. And Kern County Environmental Health Services has a pamphlet on how to go about applying for that permit and getting the right contractors put in place to properly certify and abandon your wells. Last year, we had 79% of member or reported wells be abandoned and destroyed in a certified manner. The regional board has set a target of 100%. They want to see 100% of all wells that have been abandoned being properly destroyed. So if you want to learn more about this practice and why it's important, we do have a fact sheet available to you by following the link on the screen as well. So next up is wellhead protection practices in comparison to proper destruction. This is for wells that you are actively using, or in the case of an inactive well, one that you've used in the past, but maybe this year or previous years you haven't due to groundwater levels or some reason, but you plan to use it again in the future. That's what an active and an inactive irrigation well means. And for each of these wells, we're looking to implement at least one wellhead protection practice. And so that can look like a backflow prevention check valve, an air gap if you have a non-pressurized system, good housekeeping practices such as removing trash and litter from the wellhead and making sure there's not excess vegetation, removing or making sure that water can't pool around the wellhead, keeping the ground sloping away, and an intact concrete pad. So in each of the parentheses, that is the rate of implementation for KRWCA last year that you guys indicated on your forms. So most practices do, 84% of reported wells do have at least one practice being used, if not more than one. But the goal is to have 100% of wells be using at least one wellhead protection practice. So we are close on good housekeeping practices at 98%, but we do need to see 100% implementation of wellhead protection practices moving into the future. There's also an additional fact sheet linked if you are interested in additional information. And last but not least is accounting for nitrogen in your irrigation water. So this is a critical practice. Again, the regional board has deemed it a critical practice, but there's also benefits to you. If you are testing your irrigation water for nitrogen, you can then know how much nitrogen is in the water already, and then reduce your fertilizer inputs for that year, since you'll already be applying that amount via your irrigation water. You do need to account for these numbers in your irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet, which Ryan is going to walk you through a little bit later in this presentation. And again, really reiterating this, the goal is 100% implementation. So for 2020 crop harvest year, the implementation rates for KRWCA were 75% of members said that they do this practice. And then 88% of the people that say that they test their irrigation water for nitrogen, 88% that they then say they then adjust the fertilizer rates based on those test results. And we have a few folks that think there are some barriers to adoption, such as not important or no benefit, too much effort, or lack of knowledge. And so the fact sheets and tools provided on this slide are meant to bridge some of the gaps and reiterate the importance of this practice. So that is the regulatory, that is the priority practices refresher. Trilby, do we want to break here and answer questions and then move into Farm Builder, or just hit it once?
There's only one question, so I will go ahead and answer it. The question is, will this presentation be available to participants? Yes, our presentations are always on our website after our meeting. So you will find the presentation on the website, our actual PowerPoint presentations. If you want to watch this video recording, it will be available through YouTube, and that information will be on our KRWCA.org website as well.
Okay, if there's no other questions on priority practices, we'll launch into the regulatory form submission process. So just getting started on this for the crop harvest year of 2021. And again, as a reminder, these forms are due to your coalitions by March 1st of this year. So your very first step is going to be to log into our online database called ILRP Farm. This is the database that houses all of the regulatory forms that you need to complete for your farm. So the first step to that is going to KRWCA.ilrpfarm.com, or if you're an associate member with Coelho, Westside, or Buena Vista, if you visit your coalition's website, there'll be a direct link to ILRP Farm. You'll sign in using your user ID and password. I know it's been a while. I tend to forget my passwords if it's been more than a month or so. There is a forgot password button that will send you a link to reset your password if you need to. Once you log into the system, you're going to want to look on the left-hand side and click in the toolbar on Farm Builder. This is the place where you should start for your reporting. And the very first step is you're going to create your farm in Farm Builder. So we're many years into implementation at this point. I'm sure many of you know, but your farms and all your fields do copy over from year to year. But if you're brand new to this or you have new fields, this is what the process would look like. So essentially, you build your fields by assigning a field name of your choosing to the APNs that you have enrolled in the coalition as of January 1st. And you'll name the field, you'll say how many acres is on it, if it's organic versus conventional, what crop you're growing, and then any irrigation methods you're using. You'll also have to enter the date planted for permanent crops, and you'll enter the number of APN field acres associated with the field. And I'm going to walk you through a screenshot example of what this actually looks like online in the database. So in this example, this member has 3 enrolled APNs and a total of 277 irrigated acres enrolled in the coalition. Some common errors that we see as people are going through this process is that your total field acres that you enter for all the fields on your farm must end up equaling the total acres that you have enrolled with the coalition. And all the APNs that you have enrolled need to be assigned to at least one field. And Farm Builder does a really good job, highlighted in red, of telling you the error that you need to rectify before you can move forward in your forms. And so once you've looked at that top panel, the first step is going to be actually creating your field. So you're going to click Add New Field. And when you do that, this is the menu that will pop up. And the second step is to assign field information. So you'll assign the field ID name, which is what you called the field in your operation. It's not what we call it, it's what you call it. The number of field acres, if it's conventional versus organic. You will pick the crop. Remember, if you have permanent crops, you will be asked for a planting date. An estimate is totally fine. If you can't quite remember exactly what month you planted in, an estimate is fine. And then you'll select the primary irrigation type. And if you have a secondary irrigation type, you can go ahead and indicate it. But if you don't, it's okay to leave it blank. Then the third step is to assign the field an APN field acres. So if you look over on the right-hand side of that pop-up menu, you'll be able to choose APNs. So the only APNs that are going to appear right here are ones that you have enrolled to your membership. And so in this case, this made-up grower has 3 APNs enrolled, and we are just going to make one big field out of all of the APNs. And so you can see that with the 3 APNs, one has 77 acres, one has 160, and the last one has 40, and that's the lettering in red. So in this fourth step of assigning the field in APN acres, a little definition, APN field acres equals the acres that are on the APN you are actively farming. So it's quite possible that there's non-farmed acres on an APN if there's buildings, roads, etc. Field acres equals the acres for that specific field. And just so you know, 2+ APNs assigned to a single field is okay. 2+ fields on a single APN is okay. Everyone's configuration is different, and we all know that fields don't necessarily perfectly line up with APN boundaries. So in this case, if you look over on the right, we've indicated that for these APNs, all of the acreage on those APNs are being farmed. So we've entered in the acres. It adds up to 277. We enter 277 into the field acres, click save, and all of your error indicators will go green because your numbers equal each other. And so again, reiterating common issues that we see, reported total field acres and APN field acres have to match the total irrigated acres you have enrolled. And if you enroll to the 10th of an acre or 100th of an acre, then you need to build your fields to the 10th of an acre or 100th of an acre. If you only build 100 acres worth of fields and you have 100.2 acres enrolled, Farm Builder is going to give you an error. You need to make sure that you create fields applicable to your INMP summary report. So any fields that you farmed for the previous year, you need to make sure that they are entered into the system, because that's how you are going to move on and fill out the INMP summary report. Your fields are copied over from year to year. If it is the same, you don't need to change anything. But if you have new land, newly enrolled APNs, or took over different APNs from someone else, you will need to create new fields on Farm Builder. So I do see that we have one question, but I think I just answered it on the last slide. The question is, how about if everything is the same as the previous year? Again, if you have changed none of your land holding, your fields will copy over and you do not need to edit them in Farm Builder.
I will add to that because I'm kind of reading between the lines on what this question might be. If you haven't changed anything from year to year, you do still have to complete the process and submit your forms annually. So the information will be there. It'll be easier for you if you haven't changed anything, but you do have to go in, certify that you attended a meeting. You'll want to complete your nitrogen summary report and then submit. So that process is required.
Okay, I think that's it from me, and I'll go ahead and hand it off to my colleague, Ryan Dodd.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So just take a step back and see where we are at in terms of the presentation. So I'm going to cover, it'll probably take about 30 minutes here on the information I'm going to cover, and I'm going to build off the information that Morgan presented in terms of reporting your irrigated lands paperwork for this year. So you've logged into the system, you've billed your farm, all your fields in Farm Builder. So that's complete. So now what is the next step of this ILRP farm reporting process? Well, that will be kind of step 3 here, which is the only other item this year is mostly the INMP summary report, or the Irrigation and Nitrogen Management Plan summary report. And then there is a sign and submit page, which is pretty straightforward. So the main part of the effort is this INMP summary report this year. Reminder, there's no farm evaluation or MPIR form, which just means instead of 3 separate forms that must be completed, there's only 1. So that's nice. And so hopefully that means that you guys can get through this process a little more quickly this year. So this is just another reminder of the due dates, the table that's been up now a few times. I think we've hit that March 1 deadline quite a bit. I just wanted to note that the INMP worksheet, the Irrigation and Nitrogen Management Plan worksheet, is required by all growers, and it does look forward. It looks into the future, if you will. It is a plan for the upcoming season. And the only difference in requirements is that growers in high groundwater vulnerability areas must certify that INMP, which is going to be most folks in most coalitions, but definitely not all. And if you happen to be a completely low vulnerability area membership, then you would only have to certify your INMP worksheet if you have outlier fields. So that's kind of the main difference there in terms of the requirements. But again, the INMP worksheet looks forward versus the INMP summary report, which actually looks backwards. So the INMP worksheet is a plan. The summary report is simply a reporting of what happened. And in terms of who must report an INMP worksheet, it's much more simpler now than it used to be in years past. It's everyone, every year. So some of the other forms will vary, but the INMP process is pretty consistent, if not the same thing every single year, at least for the time being. So every single year, we've got to complete this INMP process. Just some background information on crop harvest year. A lot of this information is things that we have covered in previous years, and that's simply because it's another year of the regulatory program reporting the exact same and or similar forms. Of course, we used to report a nitrogen management plan and a nitrogen management plan worksheet. Now it's called an irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet, but they're still very similar. So some of these slides will be reviewed for sure, but for the most part, that's a good thing because it means that at least they're not new. But crop harvest years, it's just a terminology thing. So, but it is something that we use a lot, already been mentioned several times in the presentation. So just want to make sure we're clear on what that is. And it's pretty straightforward. It's just the calendar year in which crop harvest was completed. And so that year, that word completed is the key word there. And it can be called some different things. But if I throw up 3 different examples here, almonds are pretty straightforward. The entire cycle, if you will, would be contained in a single calendar year. And so if that was completed in 2021, it would be the 2021 crop harvest year. And those data would be reported by March 1 of the following year. In this case, 2022, for example. A couple other crops, it could be a little bit different. Winter wheat could be harvest would be completed in April 2021. So that would also be the 2021 crop harvest year, but it could have been planted in the previous calendar year, for example. Probably the biggest item for this to note is citrus. More so in the point is that if you started harvest, and let's say, just as an example, October 2021, but didn't complete it until October 2022, that cycle, that full yield, and all the nitrogen applications associated with that would actually be the 2022 crop harvest year. And those data would actually be reported in March 1, 2023. So just a note there, it can be a little confusing. So we like to remind folks. But this presentation is only going to cover the 2022 crop harvest year INMP worksheet, very much in a summary fashion in terms of the worksheet. And then we'll go into a little bit more detail in the 2021 crop harvest year INMP summary report. So what are the objectives of this irrigation and nitrogen management plan process? So again, we've went over these before, but we always like to provide some context of what's the point of this? Why are we doing it? The main one, and probably first and foremost in most folks' eyes, is that it is a regulatory requirement. This is a regulatory program. All things associated with it are to achieve regulatory compliance. And so that's the number one goal. However, there are other things that hopefully we can get out of that, which we'll go over. But although the INMP worksheet calls itself a plan, I like to say it's more of a regulatory reporting form. So it's relatively simplistic. It is not a nutrient management plan by any means. It's mostly just in the case of the INMP, tell the coalition what your crop yield and nitrogen applications were and some basic management practices. So that's really all this INMP process entails. But number 2, of course, that's to meet the grower regulatory requirement is to submit the form. But for the coalition to fully fulfill their regulatory requirements, we have to get that information from you, which is why the forms are submitted. And so once the coalitions have that, and this is consistent throughout the Central Valley, is all the data that is submitted is anonymized. It is analyzed and compiled into reports that are ultimately submitted to the regional board, which is the regulator of the state in this case. And so that kind of completes the cycle of the reporting process. It ends up in a large report that goes to the regional board. But we also use these data to provide feedback to our members, and that's via the nitrogen analysis report, which we'll talk about in just a few slides, and also outreach events like this. And for one that may be interesting to some, but if nothing else, it is required that we share and summarize this data to our members via various forms of outreach. We certainly would like to improve the reporting on irrigation and nitrogen management. We want to tell a good story about the good job that you guys are doing. We want to have good data submitted to the regulator, and we want that all to be clean and done well, so that we don't have any issues with that. So we're always looking to continue to improve things where we can. And of course, there could be a more of an indirect benefit through this process. Many folks have their programs tightly tuned, but there's certainly an opportunity throughout, just in general, nutrient management planning or irrigation management planning to optimize or reduce inputs and ultimately save money. Some fertilizers, certainly nitrogen prices are up as much as 300% right now. There's a lot of examples of folks out there that in various publications like the West Coast Nut publication and just other examples that you growers we work with or hear about that are putting on very low amounts of nitrogen and consistently getting good solid yields using cover cropping and mulching and other practices. And so as fertilizer prices go up, the emphasis on efficiency, both on irrigation and nitrogen, becomes a little more pronounced. And throughout some of this process, there may be opportunities to improve that efficiency and maybe maintain or improve crop yield and ultimately save a little money. So INMP worksheet steps. So we're not actually going to go through these steps in today's presentation like we have, but just wanted to throw these steps up on the screen just as a reminder. So the first step is, before we really start on the next year's INMP worksheet, we really want to review the previous year's nitrogen analysis report, which we'll talk about next. And so why would we do that first? Well, before we want to review last year's data and how it was processed by the coalition to see if there were any statistical outliers, to see if there was any data that kind of stuck out a little bit that didn't look so good. Maybe it was a typo, maybe it was just a misunderstanding, something like that. We want to review that first so that we don't copy over that information every year and perpetuate that issue. So at least spend a few minutes looking at this nitrogen analysis report, or the NAR, that we'll talk about, and make sure that if there are any issues, we try, if possible, to address those before we proceed with our next year's reporting. Number two, just complete the form, basically, is what the rest of these bullet points here summarize. And then, of course, after INMP worksheet is complete, we need to certify it, and that needs to be completed by March 1 every year. And then we need to monitor and adjust our INMP, our plan, throughout the growing season. It is an adaptive management tool, so we need to adapt that and change our plan if needed. And then after we complete our season, we need to fill out the actual column of this worksheet, which is all that really matters in terms of once the season is done. Don't really care about the plan anymore. And then after that, we need to complete our INMP summary report. And so step one, I mentioned reviewing that NAR before starting on the worksheet itself. So what does that look like? So let's go through that a little bit. But before we actually jump in the nitrogen analysis report, again, this is just another reminder on what are these terms, A and R. And it may be A over R, or A divided by R, and A minus R, different ways of looking at it. So A is total applied nitrogen as reported by you on a field by field basis. And R is the nitrogen removed from the field, basically in the harvested component or the permanent tissue. So those are values that the coalition calculates. And so that's what the terms A and R represent. And then but what are those terms? So they're basically metrics used to evaluate nitrogen use efficiency. And so they are efficiency metrics, and there's lots of issues with them, but in general, they do have some value as an efficiency metric. But maybe more importantly is they could be a possible future regulatory metric And a good example of this is the dairy general order for all the dairies here in the Central Valley. They are held to a limit, those of you that are familiar with that, of specific numeric limits of an A over R ratio. And that's can be quite a challenge. And so the irrigated lands program is not there yet, but it likely will happen in some form or fashion eventually. And so we just want to be aware of that and be monitoring our information so that that doesn't create too many issues potentially down the road. So with that, now that we understand what this A over R information is, that's important to understand the nitrogen analysis report. So those have been sent out for several years now. And so this is not necessarily new in that sense. A NAR has existed for some time now, but it has been changed for 2022. That there is a new version of that, and you know, these things always every couple years or something like that will change just to meet the regulatory requirements and the changing program. But another big item that changed this year is it's now made accessible via ILRP Farm. You know, instead of just mailing these sometimes very large packets in hard copies, you can now access that at your leisure via ILRP Farm. So how do you access this new report? Well, there's two ways to do that. You could either access it via the dashboard, which as I flash this red rectangle there, you could click there on your main dashboard when you log in to ILRP Farm. It'll be pretty obvious there when you see it. Or you could access it via this left navigation toolbar here. And where I'm flashing the red rectangle there, you would just navigate over here and click on that. And both of those would take you to the same place. And so it should be pretty easy to find the report. So I mentioned it's been redesigned. And so what's the layout of this new report? Well, it's got some screenshots here. You know, we're not going to be able to cover all the details at this presentation, so just kind of providing an overview. But take a look at your report. If you submitted an INMP summary report last year, and certainly if there's questions, you know, call the coalition and we could help try our best to address those and talk through your specific report. But in general, there are 6 main sections of the report. There is the general member info, which is just your membership information, an email address, that kind of stuff. The section 2 is maybe one of the most important parts of this report, which is the outlier status. So this report, you could almost think about it like an outlier report now. That's how we more framed it for now, kind of stripped it down a little bit, simplified it, and there may be additions in the future. But basically, one of the main objectives of this report is to tell you whether or not you're identified as an outlier or not. And this is a general order. It is a requirement of the general order to do that, and that's why we do it. But the top section will tell you if you are not an outlier in green or if you are an outlier in red. And then there's also a print button there, so you could save the PDF or print a hard copy. There is a whole section of frequently asked questions here in the blue text. You can click that and it will expand. And before you maybe have any questions about that, please read through those, because hopefully they at least partially address most questions first. There's quite a bit of information there. So that's a good resource. The next section is the chart legend, which is shown here by my pointer there, and we'll go over how to kind of interpret that. 5 is the outlier fields, if you have any. The NAR will summarize what fields were identified as outliers. And then 6 is kind of the main tables and graphs of the NAR. And we want to think about it in this stoplight approach: red, yellow, and green. And more red meaning outlier in this case, yellow meaning not an outlier, but getting there, getting a little close, but still okay, and green generally meaning okay, if you will. So let's jump in here in the next slide and talk a little bit more about, very generally, how do you interpret this new nitrogen analysis report? So basically there's a table and a graph, as long as we were able to calculate those things based on the data that was reported, which was not the case for all fields. But if it was, there will be a graph there. And it's basically 2 different ways of looking at the same information. The table provides the numbers. The graph just provides some kind of an illustration of that. So in your legend here, I kind of mentioned that stoplight approach, but green means okay, yellow means still okay, but getting a little high, and red means high, outlier or high, A over R ratio or A over Y, depending on the crop. So there'll be a black dot superimposed on that. You can see here where that black dot is on each row. And what that black dot represents is your given field and where it falls in this color range. So is it a green light, yellow light, or red light type approach? And so that dot could be anywhere. It could be in the green, it could be in the yellow region, or it could be in the red. So you would basically just go line by line, and that's how you would look at the graph. Otherwise, it's just every field that you reported, line by line, that you reported. And if you have outliers, there'll be an outlier section. Even if you don't, we'll still summarize your nitrogen application rates and crop yield. So this is just basically a regurgitation of the data you reported. And then the additional information is this estimated nitrogen removal value, and then your percentile rank. So if you were 100th percentile, if you will, or 99th percentile, it would mean that your ratio was higher than 99% of all their fields of that crop. Should generally not be a good thing. And then your ratio value itself, and then the graph. So you'd basically just go row by row here and evaluate to see how your data compares to the rest of the data from the coalition, which is where these red, green, and yellow sections were developed. So in general, just like the stoplight approach, your field, or this black dot here that I'm flashing on the screen, you would prefer, generally speaking, to be in the green, but you could be in the yellow, but you also could be in the red, which would mean you're an outlier, which is not necessarily ideal. But I will say that overall in the coalition, there are very few outliers. Each crop generally almost certainly is less than 10% of the reported fields are outliers. Many crops are less than 5%. Some crops have no outliers. So this is a minimal thing, but in general, you do not want to be an outlier. So we should try to address that if possible. Sometimes the situations are such where it is what it is, and that's just the way it is. There's not necessarily major consequences for that, but we just have an obligation to notify you of that status. So just some tools and resources, and this is mostly a reminder from previous years as well. But what do I do if I didn't make any errors? All my reported fields are correct, but I still have outlier fields. So what exactly do you do in that case? Well, one of the main consequences of that is relatively minor. If you're not already, which most are already, the overwhelming majority must certify their future INMP worksheet. So that's one of the main consequences, if you will. And there's one other thing that we'll talk about in a minute. And then the other is just review the information with your coalition. We are here to help you try to understand the information as best we can. If you work with consultants or advisors or CCAs, they should be able to help you walk through that. And there's also a lot of resources online, such as the one linked here, which should just provide you a lot of information on some pretty good information on many crops, but not all, on how much nitrogen, when, and some general recommendations on how should we be considering fertilizing these crops. And then there's also other websites that have a lot of resources to help with that. So just some general suggestions. So that kind of completes the step one of the INMP worksheet process, is reviewing that NAR. And then we could step through filling out the INMP worksheet itself. We're not going to do that in detail, as we have in many previous years of running through a detailed hypothetical example. But I will say that in last year's webinar, of course, as Nicole mentioned, our presentations are available. So if you go to this link here, we did run through an example of doing that last year. So if you want to revisit that video to go step by step on filling out the INMP worksheet, you could check that video out and go to that portion of it. But here is a completed INMP worksheet. Let's just say we've went through the planning process and completed it all the way through the actual, through the whole season. And then if I throw up these red boxes, that's just going to show you what information from the INMP worksheet gets transferred over to the INMP summary report. As you notice, it's only the actual column. We don't care about this plan anymore. And then the survey questions. And just a reminder that the crop ET, anticipated crop irrigation, and irrigation water nitrogen concentration does not go to the coalition. So INMP worksheet certification requirements. So, just kind of reminder of this again is that if you are in a high vulnerability area, you must certify your INMPs via a professional like a certified crop advisor or self-certification via the self-certification program. And then also low vulnerability growers only must certify their INMP worksheet if they have outlier fields as identified via the NAR that we just talked about. So now we've completed our INMP worksheet. Let's go into talking about the INMP summary report. So this is just an example of the first page of the paper copy of the INMP summary report, which I know some folks still use. You don't really need to use the paper copy in any way, but we'll talk about if you did use it, how that translates to ILRP farm. It's the same information. So that's the main point I wanted to make with that. So just fill out the basic info, same as INMP worksheet. What's your member ID, the name, and your acres. And then the main thing I wanted to illustrate here is how does the INMP worksheet actual column values fit into the summary report. So I tried to show that here, that the actual yield goes into the yield column and the actual nitrogen applications go into the nitrogen applications here on this form. And this is the same concept as it is in ILRP farm. In terms of the survey questions, these are the same as the INMP worksheet, and they're pretty straightforward. What is your irrigation system? What are your irrigation efficiency practices? And what are your nitrogen efficiency practices? So you just basically go line by line here for all your fields and click on the practices you use. One of the things I just wanted to note, Morgan touched on the priority practices earlier, is that key practices that most growers should be implementing, if not all, with a few understandable exceptions, is the irrigation water nitrogen testing, which only 75% of KRWCA members are reporting that now. We have an obligation to get to 100% on that, so please note that here when you're answering your INMP summary report. And if you're not doing that, please consider it. And then there's other real basic questions like water application scheduled to need. So, unless you've got district restrictions or something like that, that's certainly one that we want to be saying that we're doing. Not, that we're at least, because it's very generic, right? It's just scheduled to need. It's not saying how. So in KRWCA, we did get a 96 response rate of that, and that's great. But just keep a note for real basic questions like that so we can make sure that we're getting that good data to send to the regional board. But of course, this form must ultimately be submitted via ILRP farm. And so let's talk about that now. What does it mean to actually submit this via ILRP farm? So you would log into the system, and then on this left navigation toolbar, as one option, you would go to INMP summary report and click on the INMP summary report practices, or irrigation and nitrogen management practices portion. And this is assuming that you have completed Farm Builder, of course, because you must complete Farm Builder first. So in terms of the survey questions, just like the paper form I showed, you would just navigate here and click in each box to say you're using that practice. Or if you're not using the practice, there is an NA or a none used item just to say that, hey, for this field, I'm not using any of these practices. And there is if you think you're using some practices that you would like to get credit for, if you will, or at least document that you're using and you are using best practices, feel free to put those in the other box, but there's no requirement to do that. And again, you always have your status bars up here telling you your status of each item. If you see any red or any issues, it will be highlighted up there. And so you just go through both two sections, the irrigation efficiency practices and the nitrogen efficiency practices. This is that key practice, irrigation water nitrogen testing, that we really are pushing to get to 100%. And in this case, in this example, that was the only practice that these two fields were using. And so they checked those boxes, and you're done with this section. So now we would go to the actual number side of it. We get away from the survey questions and go to the nitrogen and crop yield items, which is kind of the main part of the INMP summary report and the focus of things like the NAR. So in this case, we would open or go navigate to the INMP summary report portion here, and we would see that there's a lot of red and the boxes are blank. And we have some red over here saying that we're missing nitrogen inputs and no harvest data. So relatively straightforward here. You would just enter your data into these boxes. Enter your nitrogen amount from each of these sources, enter your yield, select your units. And then when you do that, you would, eventually your screen would look hopefully something like this, to where they are, it's all green, no issues found. And again, think of that stoplight approach, red, green, or yellow. If there are issues, you'll see some red, you may see some yellow. And that's just something that we want to make sure everything is correct if we see any of that red or possibly even yellow. So that is the, relatively straightforward. If nothing changed here from the previous years, enter that same information and make sure it's all right and confirm it. If your rate slightly changed, just slightly change the number. It's likely your yields were at least slightly different. So just make sure that all your information is updated. And so what are some common issues with the INMP summary report? So, talked about this many times over the years, but in general, general calculation errors or misunderstanding, that's something that the system ILRP farm will help guide, but it's not going to catch everything. And so if there are questions, that's what we're here to support you guys through that process. Not reporting on a per acre basis. We used to see that a lot early on in the program, but we don't see that too much anymore. But that could look something like reporting 1 million pounds of nitrogen per acre applied when actually you meant 100. Certainly, if you do that kind of thing, the system will yell at you quite a bit, and hopefully we can address that on the spot. But we will also follow up with growers after the fact as well, if needed. Production units, make sure if you're putting in the yield in pounds that you actually select pounds and not tons, for example, or vice versa, or anything like that. Inappropriately averaging across management units. So the new general order is explicit that, it must be, if you're going to use management units, every single field must be managed exactly the same. If not, it needs to be reported separately on a field by field basis. So we don't want huge hundreds or thousands of acres of management units with all the same numbers. It kind of sticks out quite a bit in the data. Crop moisture is an issue for some forage crops, but not a major concern. And like we do every year, we just kind of highlight how the data quality of the data you guys submitted. So in the KRWCA, only about 3,000 acres, or about 0.5% of the total reported acres, and only 18 fields were flagged as error data, and that's after follow-up. That's a very impressive result, and just always like to thank you guys for working with us when we perhaps call or send a letter to try to correct that data. It's to your benefit that we get that correct. It's also to the coalition's benefit. It allows us to tell that good story to the regulators and hopefully make sure that we're minimizing any regulatory pressure from the Irrigated Lands Program. So it's certainly appreciated, and we'll continue to try to get that number as close to zero as we can, realizing that it'll probably never be zero, but certainly do the best we can to get there. And I don't have too many more slides left. I see there are some questions, so I'll get to those in just a moment. But just a reminder about that validation there. So there is extensive validation in the system. Again, it's that red, that stoplight approach, if you will. And so it may look something like this. If you see red, you want to just pause. Maybe it could still be correct, but I would say probably 80 or 90% of the time, if something is red, it's likely incorrect or a typo. So just double check that. Again, the yellow means that it is okay. We're just giving you a warning that it's a little high. But no action is needed from that. But if you do have any fields flagged as red, this more info box is going to highlight red, and you must provide us some more information on that field. And what does that do? Well, this is the example of what it looks like. So you would just go through and check any items that apply, or type in any other additions that's not covered by this general list. And so check all that apply, and note that there are some new options this year. We added a few more. So why do you need to do this? Well, first of all, it helps the coalition understand the data so that we have some context to it other than just a number, right, with no context. And hopefully it helps minimize follow-up, calls and things like that. We certainly don't want to bug you guys if we don't have to. And it also may help explain maybe an outlier situation or something like that if the regional board started poking around and asking some questions. So that is a very important item. So please focus on that more info item where there are issues. You can do this for any field too. Doesn't have to just be flagged yellow or green, but it's optional at that point. So taking a step back here, that's basically, we've completed our INMP summary report, and now we're going to go into the sign and submit page, which is pretty straightforward. So when we go to the sign and submit page, which is another section of ILRP Farm, we're not done yet until we complete this sign and submit page. We're going to, certainly if you're here today, check yes that we attended an outreach event. So pretty straightforward there. And then we're going to go scroll down to this section here, which describes our INMP summary report. Again, we cannot submit our report. It's kind of the error says here, if there are any errors. So if you see any red or any errors here, we must fix those before we can submit. But once it looks like this, check mark, no errors, it all looks good. We would fill in, who the INMP summary report was completed by, type in the signature here, hit the submit button. Then this red button would pop up here where we could download the PDF or print the summary report. And that's basically it for the summary report. Then there's one last little piece of information at the bottom.
Ryan, I apologize for interrupting. If you could go back to that slide, please, the sign and submit slide.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Something new that a very small percentage of you will see. If you have not provided us with an email address for your membership, which is required, but we still have some folks who haven't provided us with an email. So this year, the system has been updated that you will not be able to submit without providing us with an email for your membership. So there's not many of you, but there are some of you that will see an added requirement before you can actually submit your reports. Thank you, Ryan. And Ryan, there is one question when you're done.
Sure. Yeah, just a couple more slides and then this section is done and then we'll get to those. So just bear with me there. So so the outlier status, it's the same information from the NAR. This is another page of the sign and submit page. If you're an outlier, it'll say outlier, and you must have to either, if you want, the one last consequence of being an outlier is if you either must attend an additional irrigation and nitrogen training provided by the coalition, or use like a CCA to certify your worksheet. And so just provide us that feedback on what your plans are, one or both. And that's the end of that process there. And just relating this back to the paper form is it's the same information essentially, just has a different look to it. So the last item is just continuing education. So again, if you are self-certifying your INMPs, you're not having like a consultant CCA do it for you, is that there is continuing education requirements for the grower program, and that is 3 hours every 3-year cycle according to your certification date. So please keep track of that. I'm not going to go in much more detail about that today, but just want to make sure you don't forget about that. And then this is just a link for your reference of some videos that were put together by the Southern San Joaquin Valley Coalition's on-demand videos that you could go and get those hours. And then this is the website of approved CU courses. And this is the same link here. I just wanted to note that it used to be a CURES website, a link to that. It has now become a little bit more formal and official, probably unfortunately, but it is now through the California Department of Food and Ag and their continuing education program here. And this is where you can go and get information on your continuing education. So with that, that's the end of my section. And we'll pause here to take a look at any questions. So Morgan, if you want to grab the screen again.
Yeah. Ryan, if you can go back there, Marley, we'll get to you in just one moment. If you can go back to the sign and submit page, just a couple slides. There is a question about whose name should go on the submittal page. So the general order requires that the member of record, so that warm body person that is the contact for the membership, submit their reports. So that is required by the general order. So we started this last year. Sorry, I need to close that out. So the INMP summary report completed by, so if a staff person or a family member or a consultant completes the report for you, their name goes there. The member signature is just that. Who is the member? And it needs to be the member's name submitting their report. Ryan, there's a question about the web pages being available after the webinar. Aren't they all on our homepage?
The web pages.
The web pages on your last slide. Where to go for resources, your resources.
Right. Yes, all those will be, the presentation will be available with all that, the links to all that information.
And then Marley, thank you for your patience. We have a question. Can you tell us about the best meters or equipment to test irrigation water for nitrogen and where we might find one purchase?
So yeah, I can take a stab at that one. I mean, the golden standard there would be submitting it to a laboratory for analysis, and that's kind of the ultimate goal. There certainly are other options and meters, we'll go in that into detail today, but happy to follow up with you on that. There's even some quick test strips available that are much cheaper that potentially could be used. Of course, there's a sacrifice in accuracy there, but there certainly are a number of meters and other options to do some general testing. But in general, the recommendation would be collecting a sample, keep it chilled, and submit it to a lab for a 20 or 30 buck analysis.
And the lab that you are working with will provide you with the appropriate sanitized bottles and such. So you would want to contact your lab so that they can instruct you on how to take the sample. I want to be clear, the nitrogen for your use and the use of the nitrogen summary reports, that kind of testing is separate from what Morgan's going to talk about now, which is the on-farm drinking water. So for your own benefit of knowing what nitrogen is in your water, you can use any lab you want and work with them. And that information does not get shared with the public. This on-farm drinking water well testing that Morgan's going to talk about is a very specific program that only certain labs that are called ILRP certified labs can be used, and all of the results do get uploaded to public databases. So I don't see any further questions. I just wanted to clarify that before Morgan starts her brief presentation on the on-farm drinking water well testing.
Okay, awesome. You guys thought you got rid of me, but I'm back for round two, but I'll make it brief. So there is a requirement for sampling on-farm drinking water wells, and the way that is defined is an on-farm drinking water well is a well that's located on an APN that you have enrolled in the coalition. It has to be enrolled, that actively provides water for human consumption. So that's drinking or cooking. And if you have one of those wells, you do need to test it annually for nitrate plus nitrite as N. And so each year that sampling window starts on January 1st and it ends on December 31st. If you do have an on-farm drinking water well, we definitely recommend not waiting until the last minute. There is a limited number of ELAB certified laboratories. And in the next slides, I'll show you where to find a laboratory and how to go through the full process. But the bottom line is, if the result is over the safe drinking water maximum contaminant level of 10 milligrams per liter, you as the member must provide notice to the users using the nitrate notification template, and you'll send a copy of that completed template to the regional board. So this is what that nitrate notification template would look like if you had a result above 10 milligrams per liter. It's essentially just a do not drink your water until further notice type notification to protect public health. There are exceptions to this. You do not need to test your well if you are providing replacement bottled water to the end user. And you do need to keep your receipts for this in case of regional board audit. But if you are providing bottled water and no one is actually drinking from the well, then you do not need to test the well. If the well was tested in 2020 or 2021 and it was above 10 milligrams per liter and you went through the full notification process, you gave it to the end user and you provided it to the regional board, you no longer need to test. So again, if you had an exceedance in 2020 or 2021 and you followed the appropriate process, you do not need to test again this year. So an ELAB certified laboratory is an environmental laboratory accreditation program. It just means that these labs have gone through an extra level of licensure that ensures the credibility of the lab results that they produce. And so there are 2 labs in Bakersfield, technically only 1 brick and mortar lab, which is Zalco Laboratories, and then BSK's Associates is a courier service. There is also a full list available online. So if you have farms and lands, up north towards Fresno or Clovis, Visalia, there are additional ELAB certified laboratories as you move north. So here are the basic steps on how to get your, go ahead.
Morgan, excuse me. Can you back up 2 slides, please?
This one?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to interject here. If anybody used, so the second bullet, if your well was tested in 2020 or 2021 and you exceeded the 10 milligrams, you do not have to test. The caveat to that is if you used BC Labs, you should test in 2022 because you're basically starting over. You may recall on this Zoom webinar last year, I made you aware that there were some problems with BC Labs not following the proper protocols. It turned out that BC Labs was not updating or uploading any of the information to the Regional Water Quality Control Board's website as required to keep our growers in compliance. So there is no record. In most cases, there is no record if you used BC Labs. So you will want to ignore this bullet if you use BC Labs and make sure that you do test in 2022. If you have an exceedance, then you will not have to test any further. I want to let you know too that because BC Labs did not upload the information and follow the appropriate processes for the on-farm drinking water well program, the regional board has agreed for growers in Kern County that used BC Labs, they will not take any compliance actions against you. So if you did use BC Labs, just make sure you keep any records that you have from them. You may know now that they are no longer in business. I believe it's called Pace Labs that took them over. Pace Labs is not a qualified lab for this program, so you don't want to reach out to Pace for this program. If you have any questions on this or concerns, feel free to give me a call, but BC Labs is no longer involved with the program. As far as I know, they're no longer in business anywhere, not just here. And we have, that is one of the reasons BSK has agreed to be a courier, is to give Kern County growers more opportunities to be able to have their testing done to meet this program. So thank you, Morgan. I just wanted to make sure folks had a status update on all of that.
Yeah, no problem. Better to be clear. Okay, so if you do need to get your well tested, here are the steps to do that. You are going to need to print out and follow the directions on the member information form. So that is, I'll show you an example of what that looks like on the next page. You'll take the completed member information form once you fill it all out to your preferred laboratory that you have decided on. The laboratory is going to take your paperwork, and in exchange, they're going to provide you with sampling bottles, instructions, and a chain of custody form. You're going to go home, you're going to take the sample of the well following the laboratory instructions. You're going to return the sample to the lab along with your completed chain of custody. Once you turn that into the lab, they'll do the analysis. They will upload it to GeoTracker, which is the regional board's database. That's how they know that you completed this requirement. And then they will also provide you with a copy of the results. If your results are greater than 10 milligrams per liter, you aren't done yet. You do need to provide the water user and the regional board with a copy of the drinking water notification form that we went over at the beginning of when I started talking about the on-farm drinking water wells. If your results are 10 milligrams per liter or below, you are done. You do not have to do anything else this year. Caveat, if you and your immediate family are the only ones consuming the water from the tested well that exceeded 10 milligrams per liter, and you indicated so on your member information form that you turn into the lab, you do not need to fill out the nitrate notification template or send anything to the regional board. So this is what the member information form looks like. So what you'll be looking at, if you and your family are the only ones that drink from the well, item 1J is where you would indicate that. And that would change the paperwork. You would not need to notify, you wouldn't have to put that sign up at your house and send it into the regional board. But the rest of the information is pretty straightforward: contact and information and location of the well. And that form is available at the URL listed here on the slide. So as Nicole said, we are happy to answer any questions now on this, but also you can contact the regional board's office via phone or email. And they also have a pretty instructive website that goes over step-by-step the purpose and how to complete the requirements of this program. That is it for content. I don't see any open questions. Nicole, do you want to close it out?
Sure. Just thank you, Morgan and Ryan. Just want to make sure everybody knows that there is a meeting evaluation to be returned to us to help us to continue to improve our presentations for you. I believe the link will pop up when you leave the webinar, but it will also be emailed to you. I believe the email will come tomorrow, and it shouldn't take long to fill out a few questions. Wanted to take the opportunity to thank the team, Morgan, Ryan, and behind the scenes, our program developer, Scott Steinbeck, with United Tracking Systems here in Bakersfield. You know, this team is behind the improvements to the grower program that we have, specifically Scott and Ryan this year for getting the nitrogen assessment report that we refer to as the NARS online and available to you and in the stop sign kind of approach. So hopefully you will see the improvements and you'll take them as improvements, and it will make your job easier, our job easier, your lives easier with meeting your regulatory compliance. I do see a question. There's a question, why do we have to do this every year? Would every 2 or 3 years suffice? This is a regulatory program set by California legislature and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So what we require is the law as it stands. So they're already accounting for not having to do all reports every year. For instance, this year you are only doing the nitrogen reports rather than the set of 3 reports. So reporting is as limited as it can be. This is a regulation. We do not set these requirements. We're just here to help you get through them. So unfortunately, we do advocate for our growers, and I think all coalitions in the Central Valley leads on our negotiations with the state and regional water quality control board, actually, and the environmental justice community, are why we are successful in only doing the other reports once every 5 years, but the nitrogen report does have to be done every year. Originally, they wanted everything to be done all of the time and everything to be certified. So it's not perfect, because I know you'd rather not do any reports at all, but this is as minimal as the law allows currently. I see no other questions. So thank you to the team. Reminder, the PDF of our PowerPoint will be posted to the website in the next few days. The link to the YouTube presentation recording will be there if for any reason you want to watch it again, or if you have staff and coworkers that could benefit from watching it, you are welcome to do so. And as always, we appreciate your time. And if you do have any questions for any of the 4 Kern coalitions, feel free to give us a call or send us an email at any time. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your evenings.